I occupied myself with cleaning my bedroom as the sun began to set, bathing the space in a cozy glow. The silence was abruptly broken by a faint creak coming from the door behind me. I turned, and John was standing in the doorway, staring at the thing in my hands. My heart stopped abruptly. How can I put this into words? It was a mischievous thing, a large, brightly colored toy that commanded attention, one that no polite conversation could easily avoid. My fingers touched the familiar object as I reached into the drawer, and I pulled it out, with the intention of removing the dust that had accumulated on the cabinet's back. Casually, I inserted the key into the lock, certain that I had locked the door, or thought I had him. Stepson was a 23-year-old man named John. He had been held captive by his work obligations and had not yet been expected to return. He frequently stayed late at a nearby brewery, enjoying the company of friends after work. Tall and slender, he exuded effortless charm as his dark hair fell into his amused blue eyes. "What is that?" With a tone that straddled the line between curiosity and light-hearted teasing, he asked. My face turned a deep crimson as heat poured into my cheeks. I quickly grabbed the closest object, a throw pillow, from the bed to hide it from view, and let the object fall from my fingers as though it had burned my skin. "It's none of your business." I stumbled a constriction in my throat, but his face was unmoving. If anything, he seemed to sink farther into the doorframe, his interest growing more intense by the second. "You really don't have to feel so ashamed." He said, a faint smile on his lips. "It's not as though I haven't seen something similar before." I felt a strong impulse to withdraw into the embrace of the earth, as though I wanted to disappear into a secret haven, away from the prying eyes of the outside world. The sheer insolence of this young man standing there completely unconcerned and unfazed while my world erupted around us. I laughed tensely, my heart pounding as I tried to ease the pressure of their stare. "For heaven's sake, John, take care of yourself. He shouldn't have been in here at all," but he stayed motionless as though time had stopped around him. Silence hung heavy in the air, a presence so heavy that it was almost suffocating. He was no longer staring at the pillow in my hands. He looked at me in a way I had never seen him look before, without the casual or playful looks that had become so commonplace in our exchanges. The moment became almost tangible. As this one lingered in the air, it was as if he had taken off the mask of the person he thought me to be, and exposed a completely different spirit underneath. A strange feeling came over me, a glimmer of warmth starting in my chest, but it was quickly eclipsed by a sharp pain of guilt. Unquestionably, there was a sense of wrongness in the air. Whatever it was, it felt deeply and permanently wrong. How did I end up in this situation? A stepmother, constrained, drained by the promises I made to his father. I broke the silence that surrounded us by turning my head. "Please do." A's smile plays on John's lips as he finally gives in and moves forward, lifting his hands in a theatrical display of surrender. He said, all right," with a playful lilt in his voice once again. But before he left, he gave me one last look, and as the door clicked behind him, that last look sent my already chaotic thoughts into a tailspin. The pillow was a silent companion in the quiet of the room. As I sat on the edge of the bed and held it firmly against my chest, my heart was pounding fiercely. I was unable to put the object back in the drawer where it belonged, as though I were imprisoned by an unseen weight. Even though I made a concerted effort to ignore it, I knew that my impression of John would be altered forever by a subtle, invisible force that seemed to change the very atmosphere around us. The moment persisted in my mind throughout the evening, refusing to be put out of my mind. I tried. I made dinner, folded the laundry carefully, and sat down on the couch next to David while he watched a selection of old westerns on TV. But even though it was warm, I couldn't help but think of John's face, his sly smile and the eerie sparkle in his eyes looming over the night. David didn't seem to notice that I was looking somewhere else. The scene was familiar. Ever since he had left the daily grind of work, he had been deeply immersed in his passions, which included caring for the earth sculpting wood and solving the intricate puzzles of crosswords. It wasn't that I was angry with him for it. It would have been easy enough. However, there were times when I felt like I had changed from being a loyal wife to more of a living caregiver. For a brief moment I looked down the dark hallway and caught a glimpse of John's silhouette moving silently inside his room. A deep bass line seemed to be at odds with a calm silence that pervaded the rest of the house as the soft murmur of music floated through his door. I looked at my husband as my heart leaped inexplicably, a flutter of emotion that defied logic, with his chin resting softly against his chest and his snoring filling the quiet room. David was soundly asleep. He had fallen asleep again in the comfort of his recliner, the dull hum of the television drifting through the air like a faraway lullaby. I considered the possibility of waking him from his sleep, but I began to wonder why I should do so. Rather, I got up and wandered into the kitchen, enjoying a brief moment of seclusion, but I knew it would not last. John stepped into the room, his bare feet gliding silently across the gleaming hardwood floor. His hair was a disheveled mess, as though he had just raked his fingers through it in a moment of reckless abandon. He was wearing a well-worn t-shirt and cozy sweatpants. He said casually, "Hey," as he opened the refrigerator door and took out a bottle of water. "You're up late." "That I could say the same about you," I replied. Keeping my tone light, he smiled, leaning against the counter, just unwinding. "You know, it's not easy being under this roof." Sometimes the comment made me pause. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, but there was a hint of something serious in his expression. "It's nothing, just living here again. I guess I feel like I don't fit anymore." I softened at that. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of maternal concern. "It's just temporary, John. You'll figure things out. You're smart and capable. You land on your feet." "Thanks, Molina," he said, his voice quieter now. I appreciate that. For a moment, we stood in silence. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the space between us shrinking. Even though neither of us moved, his eyes lingered on mine, and I felt that same flicker of warmth in my chest again. I cleared my throat and busied myself wiping the counter, desperate to break whatever spell was threatening to take hold. But John wasn't finished about earlier. He started, his tone turning playful again. "You don't have to be embarrassed. You know, I mean, we're all human, right?" My hand froze mid-wipe, and I turned to him, trying to keep my composure. "Maybe we should avoid talking about that, John. Everything is in its proper place. It was only an accident, a brief moment that was best not discussed, all right?" he said, raising his hands in a sign of submission, but the light-hearted sparkle in his eyes made my stomach turn. He walked by, getting close enough for me to smell the subtle scent of his cologne. I did not turn around, but his presence hung in the air, heavy and tangible, until he left the kitchen that evening, while I lay in the shadows next to David. My mind whirled in a storm of doubt. What was going on inside these walls, between us and inside me? I had carefully drawn boundaries throughout my life, marking off areas that were never to be crossed. But even in inadvertent moments, John had a way of effortlessly erasing those distinctions. Nevertheless, the most unsettling insight was that I secretly wondered if I really wanted him to back off. I went about my daily routine of preparing a straightforward but satisfying breakfast. Toast crackled to perfection next to the sizzling eggs in the pan, their golden yolks promising warmth, while I made a colorful smoothie for myself, a splash of color in the middle of the morning routine. David was waiting for a hot cup of coffee, its rich aroma filling the AI as usual. John was the last to enter the kitchen, his hair still slick with the afterglow of a recent shower. He greeted David casually in the morning, and his kind grin at me made my blood race with excitement. The gentle clinking of silverware, mixed with the sporadic outbursts of conversation that danced in the air as the three of us sat around the table. However, beneath this surface of informal friendship, tension was pulsing between us. John's hand felt charged every time it touched mine while pouring more coffee or reaching for the salt, as though each touch was imbued with purpose. He repeatedly observed me, his eyes unblinking and unfathomable. Naturally, David was blissfully ignorant of it all after the last of the breakfast had been cleared off the table. JN kindly offered to help me clean up what was left of our dining experience. His sudden offer was all the more shocking because normally he would have disappeared into the safety of his room or gone out with friends. My hands were busy stacking the plates in the sink when I said you don't have to, and the clatter reverberated softly in the silent room I want to. He said in response, we settled into a soft rhythm as I reached for a dish rag, but the air around us smoldered with unset tension as we both reached for the same glass, our fingers briefly touched, causing an unspoken connection to be ignited by the collision of our intentions. We didn't both pull away at once, he whispered. You're different. His voice audible above a whisper, with a sudden dry feeling in my throat. I asked, what do you mean? His eyes lingered for a moment, searching deep within mine. The presence of uncertainty cast doubt on the clarity of thought, like a shadow answers are slipping through my fingers like grains of sand leaving me at a crossroads. You just don't have the same demeanor as other women in your generation. I took a step back, trying to put some distance between us, and let out a nervous laugh. That's a shame, I see. He continued, his voice trailing off with a hint of intrigue. But there is more to it, he said in a tone now steeped in gravity. You are real, you truly listen. You perceive the essence of others. His voice laced with an unexpected sincerity. Surprised me with its sincerity. I couldn't think of anything to say. So I went back to the routine of doing the dishes, however. As I washed the plates, a distinct presence hovered just behind me, evoking conflicting feelings in me again. My heart pounded in my chest like a crazy drumbeat, and I detested how much I wanted him to stay, even for a second. As I gathered my jumbled thoughts from the depths of the living room, David's voice resonated. Molina, where have you hidden my cross-a-word book? The moment shattered and John stepped back, giving me a small, knowing smile. I'll let you get back to him. He said, his voice light again as he walked away. I felt a mix of relief and longing. I knew I was playing with fire, but some part of me couldn't help but reach for the heat. That afternoon, I busied myself with errands, anything to keep my mind occupied. But when I returned home, I found John sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the yard. He looked lost in thought, a far cry from the confident young man I was used to seeing. Hey, I said softly as I approached. He looked up, his face breaking into a small smile. Hey, everything all right? He hesitated before answering. Yeah, just thinking about what about life, I guess, where I'm headed, where I should be headed. I sat down beside him, keeping a safe distance, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of his presence. You're young, JN. You don't have to have it all figured out yet. Maybe, he said, his gaze still fixed on the yard. Then after a pause, he added, you ever feel like you're meant for something different, like you're trapped in the wrong story? His words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but the truth was I didn't believe that myself, and instead I placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed gently. You're not trapped, I said, hoping he wouldn't notice the tremor in my voice for a moment. He covered my hand with his, and the gesture felt impossibly intimate. I pulled away quickly, but the damage was sown. Another line crossed, another boundary blurred, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it. Any more that evening, the sky turned dark with an oncoming storm. The air hung heavy, as though the world itself was waiting for something to happen. Dave had gone to bed early, as he often did, complaining about an aching shoulder. I had settled into the living room with a book in hand, but I couldn't focus. The storm outside mirrored the one building within me, something restless, unpredictable, and dangerous. John was in the kitchen, the sound of the fridge opening and closing, carrying through the quiet house. I could hear the faint clink of glass as he poured himself a drink. Moments later, he appeared in the doorway of the living room, holding 2 glasses whiskey. He asked, raising an eyebrow. I blinked, caught off guard. I don't usually drink this late. Well, maybe tonight's an exception, he said with a grin, handing me a glass without waiting for an answer. I hesitated but took it. The cool glass pressing against my palm, John sank into the armchair across from me, stretching his legs out casually. The lamp beside me cast a warm glow across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw and the faint shadow of stubble on his chin. What are you reading? He asked, nodding toward the book in my lap. Just something light, I replied, holding it up briefly. Nothing exciting? He smirked. I find that hard to believe. I laughed softly. Taking a sip of the whiskey, it burned, but it was a welcome distraction from the tension that had been building all day for a while. We sat in comfortable silence, the storm outside growing louder, but then he spoke again, his voice low. "Can I ask you something?" I glanced at him wryly. "Depends on what it is." He swirled the liquid in his glass, his eyes fixed on it as though he were gathering his thoughts. "Do you ever feel stuck?" His question startled me. It was eerily similar to the one he'd asked earlier on the porch, but now there was a different weight to it. Sometimes I admitted my voice was quieter than I intended. He looked up. Then his eyes met mine. "You don't seem like someone who should be stuck. You're too alive for that." I felt my cheeks flush, and I looked away. Setting my glass down on the coffee table, "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "It's true." His words hung in the air. Thick with unspoken meaning, I stood abruptly, needing to put space between us. "I think it's time we called it a night," I said, avoiding his gaze. But before I could leave the room, the power went out. The sudden darkness was disorienting and I froze mid-step. "Oh," I muttered, my voice shaky, "it's just the he-storm." John said, his tone calm, "Hold on, I'll find a flashlight." I sensed him approaching, the faint rustle of cloth slipping by me, and then his hand touched mine in the darkness, and I took a sharp breath. Excuses fell from his mouth, but he was stuck, not going anywhere, out of sight. His hand pressed lightly against mine, and the air seemed to change. I stayed motionless. I felt like my entire body was fixed. My heart pounded so fiercely that I thought he could hear its tumultuous beat reverberating through the quiet like a delicate breeze. Molina's words floated through the air as he spoke. I turned toward him, but his figure was hidden by the darkness. I could feel him there, though his spirit enveloping me, a reassuring warmth emanating from him, the steady rhythm of his breath filling the stillness. Then his hand moved to my wrist and wrapped it in a gentle embrace. "There is danger in this idea," I said, my voice trembling with doubt. "I know," he replied, but his hold was firm for a brief moment. The first lightning strike lit up the room, revealing his face, honest, exposed, painfully close. Then he kissed me in that tense moment. The kiss started out softly, a whisper of touch as though he was preparing to be rejected, but I stood there beckoning him in. Rather, I found myself bending toward him, my fingers gripping his shirt as though he were the only thing keeping me, steady in a world that was spinning all around me. Our breaths came in heavy, rapid gasps as we instinctively separated as the lights sprang back to life. The force of our deeds swept over me like an unrelenting wave, and I started to back away, my hand shaking from the weight of it all. I said, "This can't happen." As my head shook in shock, John remained silent, a motionless figure with a mask over his face that concealed his thoughts. The following days passed in a fog of covert glances and quiet conversations. "I understand," he reiterated in an unflinching tone, "but the harm has already been inflicted. What holds us back moment, laden with unspoken feelings." I used all of my strength to avoid John, and instead immersed myself in a flurry of tasks and errands, finding comfort in the ordinary. But even with my best efforts, I couldn't shake the memory of his lips on mine, or the lingering sensation of his hand on my wrist that fateful evening, as I was folding laundry in the guest room. John was silhouetted against the faint light outside the doorway. He said, "We need to talk," with a weight in his voice that hovered between them. His tone was firm, but I avoided looking. There was nothing more to say. Yes, such a thing does exist. Exist. He closed the door softly. As he stepped over the threshold, cutting off the outside world, I sighed deeply and set the laundry aside so that my eyes could finally meet his. "Whatever this thing is, John, it has to end. So is it really wrong?" he asked, in a defiant tone, "because it doesn't seem wrong to me." His words shivered through the air, sending a chill down my spine, but I managed to keep my cool by using all of my strength. "You don't understand the complexity of this issue. Should David learn the truth, he would be blissfully ignorant," John chimed in. "But one has to wonder if he would really care these days. He hardly notices your existence, sharp and unforgiving." His words rang out in the air with a painful truth that stayed with them for a long time. Nevertheless, their accuracy did not make them Fair, he is not the focus of this story. This is about us, about the undeniable truth that whatever this is, it simply cannot come to pass. I said, my voice swelled with emotion. It goes beyond simple wrongness. It enters the realm of impossibility. John stepped forward, staring into my eyes with unwavering intentness. What is the cause of this for the apprehension that arouses in your own mind and for the fear of the judge me?